This is Monocle Fashion, the show Monocle Radio bringing you global perspectives and nuanced conversations on the worlds of fashion and style. I'm Fernando Augusto Pacheco, Monocle's senior correspondent, sitting in for Natalie Teodosi. On today's program, after a run of designer debuts in Milan Fashion Week, Grace Charlton joins me to share her highlights.
I think they're very obviously trying to prove that sex can sell.
Carolyn Bessette Kennedy is back on everyone's minds and feeds, thanks to Ryan Murphy's new series Love Story. We speak to the woman who wrote the book on her style.
You know, the designers that she was wearing were quite conceptual and quite avant-garde, so she just broke it down in her very kind of accessible, no-fuss way and made it seem really easy.
And ahead of Sourceware's Request Desk at Paris Fashion Week, we'll hear from the founder of the platform sourcing rare designer pieces.
Sourceware is making the unavailable accessible in trying to track down hard to find and rare items.
That's all ahead here on Monocle Fashion. Another fashion week is drawing to a close, and this time it was Milan's turn. I'm joined now by Grace Charlton, Monocle's associate editor of fashion and design, who was there for the shows. Grace, I've been dying to speak with you because, if you don't mind, I want to start already with a very heated topic. I think it's been quite a divisive collection. Gucci. I want to hear your thoughts before I give you mine.
I knew you were going to start there. I had a feeling. Gucci, well, it was a big statement that they made. They had all these celebrities. Obviously, this is Demna's big debut with the brand after being at Balenciaga for 10 years. It looked a lot like Tom Ford, is my main thought.
That's a very good thought. But at the same time, maybe didn't have the finesse of Tom Ford, if I may say, or would you disagree with me?
No, I agree. It felt very minimalistic. He called it a palette cleanser. I thought the sort of teaser collection he did a few months ago, La Familia, was actually stronger. This one just felt very, all black, all white suits, 90s codes.
I agree with you about the inspiration from Tom Ford, but I just think he didn't have perhaps the finesse and the sexiness that maybe Tom Ford did. Maybe this was a tiny bit more pastiche.
Yeah, pastiche is the word. I think it was sexy, though. I think they're very obviously trying to prove that sex can sell. Gucci's revenues are down famously by about 10%. They've been suffering from losses for 3 consecutive years. So they're really up against the wall. And I think they're just trying to be like, okay, well, here's sex appeal and Tom Ford and everything that we know and love about Gucci.
I agree. And in the end, that's what really matters in the end. It's going to be if it's going to sell, right? Because they're going through a lot of financial troubles. So perhaps the collection is sellable. I'm sure, with the shoes, the bags, which I think that's what Gucci does well. And that sells a lot as well.
Yes. Also, the bags that you saw on the runway, you could immediately buy. There was no delay. Usually there's like a 6-month delay from the show till when the collection that was shown goes into stores. So they had a different system. I'll be really intrigued to see how they price this Gucci era and whether it'll be a little bit more affordable, a little bit more for the people than the Sabato de Sarno era that just came before Demna.
Well, very interesting. Well, Grace, we're going to stick with the big names because, of course, Fendi was very interesting one. Was Maria Grazia Chiuri's debut as well. What did you think of that one?
It was a very Roman affair. Obviously, Maria Grazia Chiuri is proudly Roman herself. Fendi is a Roman brand. Maria Grazia Chiuri began her career in the late 1980s at Fendi in the accessories department and worked on that very iconic baguette bag that features in Sex and the City. I'm sure you know the one I'm talking about,
yes,
Faye.
Yeah.
So that was her. Anyway, she's back at the house after being at Dior. And what she showed on the runway was very much a really affirming of the house codes, very monochromatic. I really loved the little floating shirt collar necklaces that she did. They had an almost papal feel. There was a lot of lace and a lot of fur, which is what Fendi is known for. It's a fur brand. That's the origins of the house. But apparently Maria Grazia Chiuri is going to implement this program where people can bring in their vintage furs and get them restored and redesigned by the Fendi team. So, fur is a controversial topic in the fashion industry, but in many ways a lot more sustainable than fake fur. So I think it's Maria Grazia Chiuri's way of, updating the conversation a little bit. What did you think, Faye?
Well, I think the collection, was good. It was solid. It was solid debut for her. And I didn't know actually what you said about the fur. I think is a great idea. That's actually sustainable, and and you can still have your kind of extra Fendi touch to it, But I think you would agree with me, Grace, that maybe by the next collection we'll have a better idea where she wants to take the brand, right?
Of course, it's always interesting to see how designers actually evolve the language. There are a few sophomore collections as well taking place in Milan that I found stronger than the debuts, most notably Simone Bellotti at Jill Sander. I loved what he did this season, like these deconstructed, reconstructed grey suits and like amazing skirts. It was just stunning.
Fantastic. And you're off to Paris tomorrow as well. As the final week of shows in Paris is always extremely important. What are you looking forward to? I know it's hard to say at this stage, but so tell us about some of the brands you'll be keeping an eye on.
I'll definitely keep an eye on Alaïa. This is Peter Mulier's last collection for the house before he goes to Versace. So I think that will be an emotional one. He's very, very respected by fashion insiders, editors, other designers. And what he's done at Alaïa has just been praised very consistently. So let's see how he goes at Versace, but I'm excited for the last hurrah. I'm going to Dior as well, seeing Jonathan Anderson's second women's wear collection, which I think will be super interesting. You can never know what to expect with him, which is a real joy. And then otherwise, obviously, Chanel. I'm so excited about Mathieu Blasi and what he's doing for the brand. So I'm also going to that show.
And I will ask you for a favor, Grace. You have to tell me about the soundtrack, because I love, what Michel Gaubert does for the Chanel soundtracks. It's always fantastic. It's so inspirational, even for the Monocle Radio playlist. You know that?
Yeah, I know. I'll report back. I'll be Shazamming from the second row or wherever.
Not that you are ready. You're a very busy girl. But Grace, let's talk about something that I know both you and me are interested, and the producer of Monocle Fashion as well. There's a new Ryan Murphy produced series, Love Story, which tells the story of JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bessette Kennedy's relationship. And beyond the plot, the real pull is the 90s backdrop, the Calvin Klein office, her minimal clothes, razor-sharp approach to dressing. And Grace, as a fellow, sleek, tall blonde, did Carolyn Bessette ever made it into your mood board?
Of course. Thank you for the comparison. That's amazing. I've been getting it so much in the past few weeks, which is amazing. But yeah, she's like the patron saint of minimalist blondes, slightly. It's so inspirational. Obviously, she's been on my mood board for years, and I'm so happy that everyone else is, catching on. Not catching on, but, she's enjoying a renewed adoration. But yeah, I've noticed even the way I've started dressing, I've gone back to just a black t-shirt and jeans and loafers and keeping it super simple. So I think it's just nice, especially when times are a little bit tough and confusing, to just strip back your wardrobe to what works and what looks good on most people is a good way to do it.
And I think Love Story looks so beautiful. There was some controversy at the beginning, with the costumes. People say, no, that's not how they look like. But from my understanding, they had a change of costume designer. But in the end, I thought it was a great change because, you've seen the series. It genuinely takes me back to the 90s.
Yeah, I saw the first few photos that came out under the first costume designer, and I did feel my heart sink. CBK is so iconic, and they sort of put her in this very Aritzia, cheap-looking coat. And this is what really bothers me, by the way, when people think that being a minimalist is easy.
Yes.
It's not. It's not. It's about proportion. It's about material. It's about cut. And to me, this is just proof of how it can be done badly and then done really well. You're right. The costumes in the series are amazing.
I agree completely what you said about minimalism. Minimalism is not just wearing like a white shirt and a camel coat, It's about the fluidity of the clothes, the quality of the fabric that, it's visible to the naked eye.
And having pieces that are lived in, used, worn, I think you can tell when someone's just stepped out the dressing room in a fully new outfit. So a lesson for us all.
A lesson for us all, from our fellow Carolyn Bessette lookalike. Grace, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you, Faye.
Well, and continue talking about love story here. One of the key resources for the show's costume designer, Rudy Mance, was the book CBK, Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, A Life in Fashion. It traces her style through images and interviews with everyone from Edward Anningfield to Yohji Yamamoto, unpacking her enduring influence. The book's author, Sunita Kumar Nair, also served as a consultant on the series. She joined Monocle Fashion's producer, Lily Austin, and began by explaining how she came to write the book.
I worked in fashion in New York, and I actually started in England too, kind of interning, actually at Wallpaper too, when Tyler was running it. And I kind of dotted around between like Wallpaper and Dazed. And obviously, when I began in earnest in New York, my kind of world was a little with Carolyn's world, and some of the PRs were the same, and obviously the designers were still the same. For example, Narciso and Calvin and the team. But yeah, she was kind of always in my kind of view for some reason. She was always at the back of my mind, and she would pop up if I ever forgot about without sounding too whimsical about it. So the first time I saw her was when I was at university on a magazine, and then again when I was at W magazine, and I was doing some research for a fashion show, and I just chanced upon some kind of dusty newspapers of WWD. And because she made such an impression on me in the magazine front cover, I just wanted to see what the rest of her kind of clothing oeuvre was about. And when I was flicking through these social pages, I was just sort of gobsmacked, really, because it was just so clean and it was so different, and it stood out from the rest of the women that were kind of around her or the women who were attending. And it just felt very bold but still feminine, masculine but still feminine at the same time. And then fast forward to around COVID time, where I'm thinking about her influence over designers' moods boards, and also a lecturer at Central St. Martin's said that her students would also look to Carolyn. And then, I just Googled it. Is there a book on Carolyn? And there was nothing. I mean, yes, there was one or two that were not so nice about her, but there was nothing that was kind of celebrating this woman and her fashion world.
Yeah, I was kind of amazed that there haven't been more books on her style, that yours is kind of the key one, because it is such a singular style. But it also, I think, encapsulates the 90s, and also specifically New York in the 90s.
Well, it is that. I think she was a leading influence on Calvin in her lifetime, or when she worked with him, and she was there for about 8-9 years. And it was an extraordinary kind of movement at that time with their ad campaigns. The 80s had just been and gone, and it was very dazzly and very glamorous. And if you look at the photography at that time, women seemed to be overly sexualized or glamorized, and the 90s was this sudden kind of stripping down that it was almost embarrassing to wear too much of makeup or jewelry or embellishments or accessories. And Calvin was the American voice on that kind of minimalism. And with that stripping away within his design sensibility came the photography. And I discussed this with Fabian Baron, who was a leading creative director at Calvin Klein. And there was this inclination to move away, of course, the big supermodels like Cindy Crawford and Linda Evangelista and Naomi were all very important. But who was going to symbolize what Calvin was talking about within his clothing, and who would photograph that? So along came Mario Sorrenti with his girlfriend Kate Moss, who no one really knew about and who looked markedly different from those kind of categorized supermodels. So from there came the obsession campaigns. So it was an incredibly interesting time creatively. And I think even in like industrial design or art, when you think about like Donald Judd and, Agnes Martin and so many other designers who influenced and really just reiterated that stripped away minimalism. And in terms of her style, she encapsulated everything that Calvin Klein was about and that she was about. She actually wore this kind of clothing even in the 80s. But, it must have been her dream come true to be working for Calvin and dressing exactly the way that she'd always done.
Mm-hmm. I wondered if also part of what resonates so much with people is the fact that her style sort of elevated the quintessential US style into something on an even keel with Parisian style, what we think of as kind of European style. Because there were these brands that were coming up at the time, as you cover in your book, Donna Karan, Calvin Klein, Ralph Lauren, who were doing that kind of, these were the brands that were raising American style and what we think of as it. But there she was kind of on the street doing the same thing, actually kind of on a real person.
Yeah. I think her Calvin Klein days, in those days, you kind of wore the brand, you were in the brand, and the people I spoke to were like, oh yeah, like you wouldn't walk in any other designer than who you were wearing, or you were mirroring that same aesthetic. So I think she kind of emulated that. And then when she married John, what was interesting was that she kind of did a little bit of a Jackie, I guess, in wearing more Parisian-based designers. But she took it with her American sensibilities and that ease and that kind of language, the style language that Claire McCardell was about in the 1940s and 1950s, about wearing separates. And it's a woman on the go kind of idea, like, the working woman, but going out in the evening. And how do you have these wardrobe pieces that can reflect the day wear and the night wear? But, the designers that she was wearing were quite conceptual and quite avant-garde. So she just broke it down in her very kind of accessible, no-fuss way and made it seem really easy. As we know, it's not that easy to copy.
No, absolutely. I have to ask you a little bit about Love Story.
Yeah, go on.
Because I assume you've been watching it.
Yes, I've been watching it, and I actually was a consultant on it. So,
really?
Yeah. So I came on board and worked with Rudy Mance, who is the brilliant costume designer for the show, and it was great to see. Really, it was CBK becoming reality, So yeah.
So you're happy with the styling? You think they did a good job?
I am, yeah. I mean, I felt that Rudy and his team were really, really dedicated to getting it right. And it's, a few people have said, the context or the clothing that she wears isn't, say, matching the event that she was photographed in. But I think, we have to be mindful that each interpretation of Carolyn, and CBK isn't an interpretation, it is, I like to think of it as a serious journalistic piece as well as a kind of art coffee table book. But I think going forward, I'm sure there will be other interpretations of Carolyn and John Jr.'s story, and I think it doesn't need to be in context. You get the idea of who the woman was and what she wore, and I think Sarah did a great job in trying to capture the essence of her.
That was Sunita Kumar Nair speaking with Monocle's Lily Austin. Her book, CBK, Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, A Life in Fashion, is published by Abrams. This is Monocle Fashion. And finally, if you're now feeling inspired to invest in a CBK-style trench coat or a 90s Calvin Klein slip dress, you might want to know about Sourceware, the app developed to track down vintage and sold-out designer pieces. And this week, they are bringing the service to Paris Fashion Week with the Request Desk, an installation tracing the sourcing journey from search to find. Monocle's fashion director, Natalie Teodosi, spoke to Sourceware's founder, Erica Wright, to hear more.
Sourceware essentially is a platform to connect people to a trusted network of sourcing experts, all through requests. The main function being the request side of the platform, where you can search for anything from a current season item that might have sold out in your region, all the way through to past season items that are no longer in production, or vintage items that are extremely hard to find and rare. And essentially, the search is moving through this network of very kind of established relationships and sourcing experts that have this very deep market knowledge to track these pieces down. So essentially, Sourceware is making the unavailable accessible in trying to track down hard to find and rare items.
And what I've loved about the concept from the beginning is that you're almost kind of offering a different way to think about shopping for fashion. It used to be so fast, even luxury fashion. With the rise of e-commerce, you could buy something, a really high ticket item with a few clicks. But this makes it more of an adventure. You're connecting with your personal shopper. You have to wait a bit sometimes. It's about specific items. Do you think that was part of the mission, and that people's mindsets is shifting a bit? It's almost like collecting art or a special piece of design and furniture.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, the idea around Sourceware is really, obviously my background was in e-commerce retail for a long time. And I think, even kind of 4 or 5 years ago, we were looking at this shift in the industry that was happening, of this kind of fatigue around, people receiving hundreds of emails a day, depending on how many platforms you're signed up to, and this kind of continuous bombardment of newness. And I think at the time when we were launching, I think we were, really trying to tap into that conversation of, we could see that the customer was starting to have this fatigue and, trying to keep up with seasons and sale, periods. And so to look at having kind of a platform that functions as a marketplace, I mean, if you go on the app, you can see product that lands daily of new arrivals that are like specific finds sourced through the network, but all of them are highly curated by our platform. And then obviously to talk about the request side, that was really, where we saw the USP for the business. I mean, requests signal intent, right? So it's not about kind of this continuous scroll. It's not about necessarily wanting more, but just wanting to actually find the right piece. And that's really why Sourceware was built. It was this idea of endless scrolling, not being able to find the specific item, using search aggregators, using all of these different platforms, whether it's Google or endless scrolling on marketplaces to try and track down that specific piece, calling stores to try and find an item and kind of not getting anywhere. So there was this real kind of detachment from the general luxury customer experience with what they could actually find and how they could have access to those pieces. And yeah, so I think, to go back to, Sourceware and the premise of Sourceware is really around the request and, the intent behind the request and being able to cater to that person who says, I can't find it, what do I do next?
And I mean, you've now built it and established an audience, and you're taking on Paris Fashion Week. So tell me what the plan is for that and how the whole idea came about for the installation that you're doing in Paris.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, to talk about Paris, I mean, ultimately the industry is so optimized for speed and constant newness, and obviously it's where all the major houses show. But Sorso is really built as an alternative. It's rooted in this, deep market and brand knowledge, relationships being at the heart of the platform. And really, we wanted to highlight the art of the search. That's really what the concept is about. We see that so many of the most interesting pieces that are found really exist outside traditional retail visibility. So it could be, a request for a 1975 Calvin Klein runway jacket, a vintage Hermes plume bag that's not so easily discovered online, all the way through to kind of really hyper-specific pieces like, Carolyn Bessette Kennedy's Prada coat that she's been seen wearing in New York. And that's that kind of image that has resurfaced over and over again as such kind of like a culturally significant, fashion moment. Others are obviously looking more to the present. We see people obviously tracking down, trying to find sold out shoes from Jonathan Anderson's Dior that's just landed. It could be a bag from the Row that's sold out and or disappeared, before the client could get their hands on it. So we spent the last few years kind of really heavily investing in developing the digital infrastructure to support the network to find these pieces. And the request desk is simply about making that system more visible and kind of translating something quite operational into this physical experience for our community and the industry to experience, to see. So yeah, the request desk ultimately is this kind of physical expression of the network.
And on that note, knowing that what your customers are having their eye out for, you have a very kind of stylish wardrobe as we go into Paris Fashion Week.
Yeah.
What are kind of the brands, the collections that you're looking forward to seeing? Also the debuts that are working and that you're getting requests for.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear from your perspective, because you have a very different take on things that's kind of really rooted in what people are actually buying, which sometimes a lot of us, when we're just sitting at the shows and thinking about it from a cultural perspective, you forget that kind of practicality of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, it goes without saying that Chanel is sort of top of everyone's mind at the moment with what Matthew Blasi is doing there. I think he's compelling for different reasons that we've, seen this kind of in this sort of musical chairs of creative directors recently, but his position kind of feels as though it's very much about the construction. He's, a material genius, right? So I think for clients that are kind of looking to request sort of new season Chanel, we definitely see already this demand for specific pieces from his first kind of spring summer 2026 debut, the extra large tote, which is really having quite a moment on social already. I think, that's going to be
no more mini bags, those.
It's so interesting. Yeah. The teeny tiny like pocket bags. Yeah, I think, I think he speaks to kind of this beauty and craftsmanship, but also this practicality of what women today want to wear. And I feel that is really what the sourcewear client is searching for. It's not about what is this kind of one trend-led bag of the season that I want to buy just because everyone else has it. It's like in more of the perspective of what does this resale value look like in 5 years? Is this a piece I want to hold on to for 10 years and pass down to, in the future? I think those are the kind of questions that our clients are thinking about. And I think Blasi's direction in Chanel is really speaking to that woman. At the same time, of course, what Jonathan Anderson is doing at Dior, we've already seen a lot of demand for his pieces in the new collection. There's certain shoes that have already, we've seen kind of sold out globally. In addition to ready-to-wear pieces, which I think is quite interesting, there's some slightly more commercial pieces that are, I suppose, kind of more of the entry-level price point now of Dior ready-to-wear that is still sort of speaking to that client who was a big fan of what he did at Loewe, all the way through to obviously couture, which speaks to the VIP client that, of course, Dior caters to very beautifully. Dior definitely is in good hands with Anderson.
And it was interesting because it was quite divisive, but it's interesting to hear your take that it is working already commercially, that people are buying up the accessories and they're ready to wear. So that's kind of the ultimate sign of whether something is successful or not. So
absolutely. And I think it kind of comes back to designers that speak to the cultural conversation really well. And I think both of them really do that. I think Dior has obviously offered Jonathan Anderson, like a much larger and more historic canvas, but there's then so much more to play with in terms of the heritage that comes with that. And I think, we see clients getting excited over things like, the logo update, just the fact that he's kind of gone back. We can see those, Christian Dior shoe references from the archive in the 60s, where they had that gold emblem logo in the soles. And that's now in the new collection. And I think that's really what the client is also really buying into. It's this nod to heritage and this excitement over kind of reviving that again.
That was Erica Wright, the founder of Sourceware, speaking with Monocle's fashion director, Natalie Teodosi. And that's it for today's program. Join us next week for more Fashion Week dispatches and in-depth interviews. This episode was produced and edited by Lily Austin. I'm Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Thanks for listening.